Hi everyone, welcome to episode 11 of reviewing and ranking my entire CD collection. My homage to the days of the physical copy. Why not go for all my CDs, have a nostalgia fest and re-listen to them? There is no reason not to do this. Today's album is the first of many compilation albums in my collection, American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986. I was debating whether or not to review and rank this CD because it's not an album or EP in a traditional sense. It's a bit of a cheat code for making a pleasurable listening experience as is attributed to various artists. For this reason, it will be disqualified from wherever it charts within the albums already reviewed in the series, and we will have a Lance Armstrong asterisk next to it when merged with the rest of the albums. The real albums and EPs didn't use any Lance-esque blood transfusions. It's taken me 11 episodes to finally get to a CD I'm really familiar with. American Hardcore is in heavy rotation in my listening schedule, being one of my go-to albums and featuring some of my favourite bands of all time. American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986 was released in 2006 on Rhino Records, making me 18 years late to the party, as well as 38 and 44 years late due to numerous parties based on the title of the compilation in which these songs were recorded. This compilation was released in conjunction with a documentary of the same name which, as someone who is a huge fan of this genre and era, was underwhelming, save by all the Ian MacKaye talking heads and Minor Threat footage. Without wanting this to turn into a film review, here are a few observations. Firstly, the interviewees were complaining about music prior to hardcore punk's birth, stating that Journey, The Doors, The Beatles, Kiss, Fleetwood Mac, Van Halen and New Wave was the only music on offer at the time. In 1980, what about all the glorious punk music that paved the way for hardcore, not only from America but from the UK too? Didn't a damn tour of the US in the late 70s influence a lot of these bands? Bar Ian MacKaye saying he had nothing in common with Sid Vicious, there was no mention of the punk scene prior to 1980 and how original punk morphed into hardcore. Middle Class stated that the Germs, X, Fear, the Weirdos and the Screamers were traditional punk bands that influenced hardcore as opposed to hardcore bands in their own right. This confused me a lot, as I would consider the Germs and Fear in particular as hardcore punk stalwarts. Second point, the years 1980 to 1986. Why these years? Out of Vogue by Middle Class, often cited as the first hardcore release, came out in 1978. Nervous Breakdown by Black Flag was released in 1979. I'm watching this not only as a hardcore punk fan, but a historian who wants accurate information, and it irks me that the 1980 date is not the right year. Also, the album doesn't have any songs from 84, 85 or 86. I want this documentary to tell me about the first records with a bit of detail, how those records then influenced the next landmark recordings. I want to hear about those I Was There seminal gigs, American Hardcore's equivalent to the Sex Pistols playing at the Free Trade Hall. So many details were lacking. Third thing, how on earth can you make a documentary about hardcore punk in America and not even mention the Dead Kennedys? There's a picture of them next to American Hardcore in the Burnt Disc Dictionary. It's like making a documentary about the history of the Ballon d'Or and not mentioning Messi. Let's make a documentary about the jungle, but don't mention lions. Even if they had been Chris Benoit for some reason, I'm amazed nobody even mentioned them. I presume they wanted too much money to be in the doc. Leave your conspiracy theories in the comments as to why we didn't see the Dead Kennedys or hear about them. Fourth thing, see third point but replace Dead Kennedys with Misfits. There was a lot of old man yells at cloud types that told us again and again it was fast, short and angry. Why so bitter about other types of music? These new bands on MTV aren't punk. So what? Can't you just enjoy your time, Mr. Angry Cro-Mags man? Point 5. Maybe there's been some concussions from how wild the mosh pits were back then, but when discussing the demise of hardcore in 1986, two separate people cited the Bad Brains starting to play reggae around that time was the beginning of the end. But Brains had always played reggae songs live throughout the tenure, as far back as the late 70s. Then there is Jack Grisham of TSOL, who just came across as another level of horrible. Boasted about his juvenile behaviour, beating people up and unrepeatable stuff for this family-friendly channel, which is stuff I would consider anti-punk. Let's just call it GG Allen Light. It reminded me of that time I went to the Dirty Weekend Festival in 2012 and someone had completely smashed up the toilet in the name of punk. I thought it was Smash the System, not Smash the System. It's a shame about Grisham because I often cite TSOL's Abolish Government Silent Majority as the greatest punk song of all time. Everything about that song is good enough for the art to be appreciated whilst putting aside the flawed nature of the artist. This would have worked better as a documentary about one band or one city. Maybe the Bad Brains, Black Flag or Minor Threat, or maybe the LA scene. Right, enough of slagging the film off. I really did want to enjoy it, at least the CD filled me with joy. Every song on the CD is heard on the film, featuring the biggest hitters of the American hardcore punk scene, Black Flag, Minor Threat, DOA, Bad Brains, Adolescence, as well as lesser known bands that managed to scratch that hardcore punk itch, such as The Articles of Faith, Jerry's Kids and Really Red, to name a few. There is a well-rounded pick of bands, but it does intrigue how so many great bands were left out. See Descendants, TSOL, Dead Milkmen, Teen Idols. Did I mention the Misfits? Did I mention the Dead Kennedys? When you don't give so much focus on the bands that aren't featured and just listen to what you're given, the tracks deliver on what makes 80s hardcore punk so great. Probably the greatest genre and era of music, period. These selections amplify all the great hallmarks such as the imperfect snarling straight to the point vocals, the fast as you can drum beats. Red Tape by Circle Jerks is a great example of how mesmerising hardcore punk drumming can be. The wild guitar and bass ethos of getting through as many chords as you can with the distortion ramped up. There's something about the imperfect 80s production I can't quite put my finger on that adds to its charm. It's raw, it's unpolished, it's exciting, it's passionate, it's full of beans. It's actually full of melodies if you're listening properly. The youthful spirit on these songs makes the music sound so fresh. You would never associate these songs being 45 years old. They could have been written yesterday. Jerry's Kids only needed 20 seconds to make their perfect impact on the album, as did The Freeze. They didn't need a second longer. I love how hardcore punk never outstays its welcome or feels the need to overexpand in a way that thrash tends to do. Pour your heart out and get everything you want to say off your chest in under a minute. Unless you are as talented at songwriting as Articles of Faith, whose bad attitude shows us that if you have the ability to expand on sections and build on riffs and lulls, you can stretch it out to 2 minutes 35 seconds. I absolutely love everything about that song. It's one song I hadn't heard prior to owning this CD, and a song I would consider one of the greatest of any genre. There are a couple of bands here that are a bit too loose and sloppy for my liking, The Untouchables and Void. Then there is a handful of bands who are just trying to have the title as being the fastest just for the sake of it. DRI, or Dirty Rotten Imbeciles if you want to keep it formal. Musically, this is a perfect compilation, well representing American hardcore at the height of its dominance. Each song gets you fired up and makes you want to jump in a pit and makes you wish you were born in Washington DC in 1964. Bar that horrendous flipper song at the end, it's an easy 10 out of 10 compilation that every respected punker should own. It has the best bands of the genre bar one massive omission, plus gives people the opportunity to discover some lesser known bands worthy of sitting at the big boys table like the Big Boys. You know it's a landmark CD when your mate Rich, who is 1,000 times more punk than you, knows more bands than you, goes to more gigs in a week than you do in a year, has a tattoo of the front cover art, all of his hundreds of favourites, and he chose this glorious compilation to have on his body. If you're new to hardcore punk, I'd tell you to buy this. This and Plastic Surgery Disasters by the Dead Kennedys. Setting the music aside for a moment, let's talk about the packaging of the CD. As a whole package, it's disappointing. If we take the title literally, American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986, it could have been a double album with some tracks from 84, 85 and 86. A really detailed booklet and liner notes like the 20 Years of Discord box set, where no detail is too niche or dull, would have been a fantastic counterpoint to the soundtrack. Those Trojan box sets are also a really good example of how to package a compilation like this. Rhino missed the trick. They should have made their liner notes like a history book with loads of detail. So combining the music with the packaging and information, or lack thereof, I have to give American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986 a 9.5 out of 10. Great choice of bands that do sound slightly different from each other and represent the scene perfectly. Let's see where American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986 ranks amongst the rest of the albums reviewed in the series. Even with the lack of packaging, Dead Kennedys and incorrect dates, I would rather listen to this than anything else on the list all day every day and twice on Sundays. So for that reason we have a new number one album. Congratulations to American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986 on becoming the new number one album of the series. But didn't you say because it's not a real album in the authentic sense, it's not one band coming up with 15 tracks that blend together, which is a proper craft, this cheat album would get the Lance Armstrong treatment of an asterisk next to it wherever it charted because of its musical blood transfusion? Alright, okay, I did say that. American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986 can sit at the top of the chart, but if anyone asks, All Hallows is still number one. Let's get that big fat asterisk on this album. Here's a rundown of the new charts. Number 10 we've got AFI with December Underground. Number 9 we've got The Addicts with 27. Number 8 we've got AFI with Sing the Sorrow. Number 7 we've got Akala with Freedom Lasso. Number 6 Christina Aguilera, Stripped. Number 5 All with Mass Murder. Number 4 we've got Adele with 21. Number 3, we've got Almeida with Social Media Circus. Number 2, we've got Afro Cluster with We Don Land. Number 1, we've got AFI with All Hollows. And disqualified from being number 1, we've got American Hardcore, American Punk Rock, History, American Punk Rock, 1980 to 1986, but it's been disqualified. Thank you for getting this far into the video. It was a bit weird reviewing a compilation. What did you think of the review? Is American Hardcore, the history of American punk rock 1980 to 1986, the greatest punk compilation of all time? Is anything longer than 45 seconds too long for a hardcore punk song? Shall I let it go about the Dead Kennedys? Let me know in the comments. Like the video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode in the series. The next album review will be And You Call This Civilization. It's another punk rock compilation. Another one. Oh blimey. Gives me an opportunity to do a better job. Thanks. See you in the next one.